She never imagined her mother would be found like that, alone, sick, and quietly fading under the harsh hospital lights, as if the world had forgotten she existed. "People like you only show up when it's too late," someone murmured behind her, a voice sharp enough to cut through the sterile air. The successful businesswoman, always in control, always untouchable, felt her chest collapse the moment she saw her mother curled up in that narrow bed, hair uncombed, glasses missing, her frail hands trembling, as if apologizing for still being alive. Machines hummed around her, but none of them could hide the truth. This woman had been here for far too long, and completely alone. The IV bag was half empty. The call button dangled unplugged. A cold tray of untouched food sat on the table. Nothing about that room looked cared for, and nothing about her mother's eyes looked normal. They were tired, afraid, almost guilty. And then, the worst part, her mother flinched when she approached, as if she had learned, in silence, to expect the worst from those who should love her the most. What happened to her? Who left her here? And why was everyone avoiding the truth? Because something was wrong, deeply wrong, and every whisper in the hallway seemed to carry a warning. "Stay with me until the end, because what this daughter uncovers will break your heart in ways you're not prepared for. If this were your mother, what would you do?" The emails did not stop, even on the elevator ride down from the 32nd floor. Emily Parker's phone buzzed in her hand as the glass walls reflected her crisp blazer, neat ponytail, and the controlled, polished woman the world had come to know. She barely glanced at the city skyline sprawled beyond the elevator, a blur of concrete, glass, and opportunity she'd spent her whole life chasing. "Emily, we need those projections. Emily, board wants numbers before Monday. Emily, quick call? Just 5 minutes." Everything was, "Emily, we need. Emily, can you? Emily, it's urgent." Being needed had become her identity. It made staying late at the office feel noble, justified. It made missing birthdays and holidays feel like sacrifices for a future she was building for everyone. Or at least, that's what she kept telling herself. The elevator opened to the lobby, all marble floors and quiet, expensive lighting. The receptionist lifted a hand, but Emily barely noticed. Her heels clicked sharply as she crossed the floor, the sound confident, efficient, practiced. She was already forming answers in her head for the next meeting she was supposed to be in, when her phone chimed with a different tone. Not work. Personal. Unknown number. She frowned and answered. "This is Emily." A pause. Then a voice, calm but strained. "Ms. Parker? This is St. Mary's Medical Center. Are you the daughter of Helen Parker?" Everything in her body went still, like someone had pressed pause on her entire life. "Yes," she replied slowly. "Yes, she's my mother." What's going on?" "We've been trying to reach you," the nurse said. "Your mother was admitted a few days ago. Her condition is stable at the moment, but she's alone. We needed to confirm some information and discuss her care. Can you come in today?" "A few days ago?" The words scraped out of her throat. "Why wasn't I? How did—" The nurse hesitated. "The number we had on file wasn't working. She didn't want us to bother you, but this can't wait. I'm sorry to drop this on you like this, ma'am." The call ended with directions and a room number, but Emily barely heard them. Her brain was roaring with a single cruel question. Her mother was in the hospital for days, and no one told her? No, that was not possible. Her mother would have called, would have left a message, would have texted, something. Unless— Emily pushed the thought away. Outside, the late afternoon air in Chicago felt colder than it should have been. The wind off the lake cut through her blazer as she hurried toward the parking garage, phone still in her hand, screen dark now. Her car was exactly where she always left it, tidy and shining, like the rest of her carefully controlled life. She slid into the driver's seat and just sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. "It's probably not that bad," she told herself. "Maybe just tests, maybe routine, maybe a checkup that got a little more complicated. Hospitals overreact. They have to. It's fine." But the nurse's voice hadn't sounded like it was fine. The drive to the hospital felt both too long and not long enough. The city rushed past her windows. Billboards, traffic, people with grocery bags, a teenager pushing an old man in a wheelchair, a woman waiting at a bus stop with a bouquet of grocery store flowers clutched in her hands. For a second, Emily thought of her mother, of the times she'd taken 2 buses across town just to bring Emily a bag of homemade cookies to her dorm room. "You're too skinny," her mother would say, patting her cheek. "These books don't hug you at night, you know." Emily used to laugh and roll her eyes, embarrassed, but secretly, she'd loved it. Somewhere along the way, between promotions and deadlines, those visits had stopped. There was always another video call, another, "Mom, I'm so busy, can we talk later?" that turned into days, then weeks. At a red light, her phone lit up again with work messages. She flipped it face down without answering. The silence in the car felt heavier than any corporate crisis. When she pulled into the hospital parking lot, the sky was turning a pale winter blue, streaked with the last hints of daylight. St. Mary's Medical Center looked like every generic hospital she'd ever seen on TV. Big glass windows, brick wings, automatic doors opening and closing as people streamed in and out. Some carried balloons, some carried overnight bags. Some carried nothing but the expression of someone holding their breath. Inside, everything smelled like antiseptic and something else, something metallic and faintly sour that clung to the back of her throat. The overhead lights buzzed softly. Somewhere, a child cried. Somewhere else, a monitor beeped steadily, like a mechanical heartbeat. "Can I help you?" the woman at the front desk asked. "I'm here to see Helen Parker," Emily said, her voice flatter than she intended. "They called me." The woman typed something into the computer. "She's on the 4th floor, room 416. Take the elevator down that hall. Make a left." Emily nodded, but her feet felt disconnected from her body as she walked. The elevator doors closed around her, and she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirrored surface. She still looked like the version of Emily everyone knew. Professional, composed, the woman who always had an answer, but her eyes looked different, tighter, afraid. The 4th floor smelled even stronger of disinfectant. The hallway was lined with doors, some open just enough for her to see glimpses of people in beds, families huddled in chairs, nurses moving like ghosts in soft shoes and scrubs. Emily scanned the numbers until she reached 416. The door was partially closed. Her hand shook when she pushed it open. The first thing she noticed was the light. Harsh, fluorescent, unforgiving. It made the room feel colder, emptier. The second thing she noticed was the tray of food on the bedside table, the mashed potatoes forming a crust around the edges, the green beans limp, the cup of Jell-O untouched. And then she saw her. Her mother looked impossibly small in the wide hospital bed, like someone had folded her down into a smaller version of herself. Her hair, once carefully brushed and set every morning, hung in uneven wisps against the pillow. Her glasses were nowhere to be seen. Without them, her face looked strangely naked, more fragile. Her hands trembled slightly above the blanket, fingers twisted together as if she were apologizing to the air. "Mom?" Emily's voice cracked on the single syllable. Helen's head turned slowly, as if every movement hurt. Her eyes squinted, trying to focus. When recognition finally settled in, she didn't smile. She didn't reach out. She flinched. "Oh," Helen whispered, her voice hoarse. "Emmy, you didn't have to come. You must be busy." The words hit harder than any accusation. Didn't have to come. How many times had her mother practiced that sentence, just in case this moment ever happened? How many times had she told herself that her daughter's absence meant she was important, that she was doing great things, that it was okay? Emily moved closer, each step heavy. The call button cord hung off the side rail, the button itself resting uselessly on the floor, as if someone had dropped it and never bothered to pick it up. The IV bag above her mother's head was nearly empty, the plastic crinkling. "Mom, how long have you been here?" Emily asked. Her throat felt tight. "Why didn't you call me? Why didn't anyone call me?" Her mother smiled, a small, tired smile that made Emily's chest ache. "Oh, I didn't want to bother you, baby. They're just poking around. Old people stuff. Don't you worry. Old people stuff." as if that explained the shadows under her eyes, the slight bruise near her wrist where tape pulled at thin skin, the way her chest rose and fell like it was negotiating every breath. "Mrs. Parker?" A nurse appeared in the doorway, holding a clipboard. "We're so glad your daughter finally made it in." The word finally lodged in Emily's ear like a splinter. The nurse, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and a forced smile, stepped inside. "You must be Emily. I'm Carla. We've left several messages and, well, your mom didn't want us to make a fuss." "I never got any messages," Emily said quickly, almost defensively. "Nobody called me. The number you used, where did you—" "We used the one on file," Carla said. "It's a landline, I think. Disconnected. Your mother said you were very busy with work. She didn't want to be a burden." Emily looked back at her mother, who was studying the blanket as if it were suddenly very interesting. Not a burden. How many times had she heard that phrase in her life? From clients, from her team, from executives who liked her because she solved problems and never complained. But hearing it from her mother in a hospital bed made something twist painfully inside her. "We should go over some things," Carla continued, her tone softening. "Medications? Next steps? Insurance. It's complicated. We've done what we could, but there have been limitations." "Limitations?" Emily repeated. "What does that even mean?" Carla hesitated. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across her face. Frustration, maybe, or guilt. "I'll explain everything," she said eventually. "But first I need to change her IV. It's been a while." Emily watched as the nurse moved to the IV stand, lips pressing into a line when she saw how low the bag had gotten. Carla's movements were practiced, efficient, but there was a tightness in her jaw that told Emily this was not how things were supposed to be. "How long has it been like that?" Emily asked quietly. Carla didn't look at her. "Too long," she muttered, almost under her breath. Then, as if realizing she'd said too much, she forced another smile. "I'll be right back with the paperwork," she said, and slipped out of the room. The door closed with a soft click, leaving Emily alone with her mother and the hum of the machines. Outside the window, the sky had deepened into a dusky blue. The city lights were beginning to flicker on one by one, like small distant fires. Emily pulled the lone plastic chair closer to the bed and sat down. Up close, she could see how thin her mother's arms had become, the way her hospital bracelet slid loosely up and down her wrist. There were faint yellow and purple marks near her elbow, like old bruises trying to disappear. In the hours that followed, Emily stayed in that plastic chair like it was the only thing keeping her upright. The hospital room felt both too small and too big at the same time. Too small for all the guilt pressing in on her chest. Too big for the tiny, fragile woman in the bed who had once seemed so unshakable. Helen drifted in and out of sleep, her breaths shallow and uneven. Every few minutes she would stir, mumble something about the lights or the noise or the time, then apologize as if even existing was an inconvenience. "Sorry, Emmy," she whispered once, eyes barely open. "I know you're tired. You work so hard." Emily swallowed hard. "It's okay, Mom. I'm here. You should have been here sooner." The thought came uninvited, cruel and sharp, and it didn't care that it was true. At some point, Carla returned with a stack of forms and a slightly harried expression. She pulled the curtain halfway around the bed, leaving Emily on the other side with a clipboard and a pen. There were questions about emergency contacts, primary care physicians, allergies, insurance, living arrangements. "Does your mother live alone?" one line asked. "Yes," Emily checked, but even that answer sat heavy in her stomach. Helen lived alone in a small apartment on the west side, the same one she'd moved into after Emily's father died. Emily had helped her pick it out, signed the rental papers, promised, "I'll come by on weekends, Mom. We'll make it our little spot." The weekends had turned into work calls. The calls turned into texts. The texts turned into, "I'll visit next month, I swear." Carla reappeared as Emily handed the clipboard back. "Thank you," the nurse said, scanning the pages quickly. "We've been trying to fill in the gaps, but some of this we really needed you for." "Gaps?" Emily asked, her voice sharper than before. What does that mean? What kind of care has she been getting? Carla exhaled, glanced at the partially closed curtain, and then gently pulled it back so Helen could see them if she woke up. She came in through the ER 3 days ago, she said. Shortness of breath, chest discomfort, dehydration, very weak. The neighbor called 911. Emily's stomach dropped. The neighbor? Yes, Ms. Parker next door, I think. She's been checking in on your mother. She rode in the ambulance with her. Emily had to chew on that silently for a moment. She didn't even know her mother had a neighbor close enough to do that. Your mom didn't want to stay, Carla continued. Said she didn't want to take up a bed. Typical. Her tone was half affectionate, half frustrated, but she needed to. Her blood pressure was all over the place. She was very weak, and we found signs she hasn't been eating regularly. Emily tried to picture her mother at home, sitting at that tiny kitchen table with the faded floral tablecloth, trying to stretch meals, telling herself she wasn't that hungry anyway. She remembered the last time she'd visited the apartment. It had been over a year ago, maybe more. There had been boxes piled in the corner, mail stacked high, a few prescription bottles on the counter with labels she didn't read. She'd noticed. She'd just chosen not to press. We've done what we can, Carla said carefully. But there have been some constraints. Emily narrowed her eyes. You said that before. Constraints. Limitations. What does that actually mean? I need you to be direct with me. Carla hesitated, then glanced at her watch. I'll tell you what, she said softly. The social worker on call will be around in about 40 minutes. She can explain more of the logistics. From my side? She looked straight at Emily. Your mother should not have been this alone for this long. The sentence landed like a blow. Before Emily could answer, Helen stirred, her eyes fluttering open. Is it morning? She asked weakly. No, Mom, Emily said, forcing her voice to stay gentle. It's still the same day. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Helen blinked slowly, then gave a small nod like she was trying to be brave. You shouldn't stay too long. They work you too hard. You need your rest. I'll manage, Emily replied. Carla smiled sadly at the older woman. We're going to take good care of you, okay, Ms. Parker? Helen smiled back, but there was a flicker of something else beneath it. Unease, or maybe doubt. Everyone is so busy, she murmured. I don't want to be trouble. You're not trouble, Emily said quickly. You're my mother. For a second, something wet shimmered in Helen's eyes, then vanished as she looked away. After Carla left, Emily sat quietly, listening to the rhythmic beeping of the monitor. She watched the hairs on her mother's arm tremble with each breath, the thin blanket rising and falling. What had her mother's life really looked like these last few months? Not the version she mentioned on their rushed phone calls. The real version, the one with the silence. The one with the empty chair at the kitchen table, the one with TV shows playing to no one in particular while the clock ticked on the wall. Emily's mind drifted away from the sterile room, back to a different kitchen, a different time. She saw her mother in their old house, standing at the stove, steam rising from a pot of chicken soup. High school Emily would come home late from study sessions or extracurriculars, and there her mother would be, hair pinned back, apron smeared with flour, eyes lighting up like Emily was the best part of her day. How was it? Helen would ask. Tell me everything. And Emily would talk about exams, about friends, about college applications. Her mother listened like each detail was precious, nodding, smiling, occasionally wiping her hands on a towel to reach over and tuck a loose strand of hair behind Emily's ear. Back then, she'd assumed it would always be like that her mother would always be there waiting with a warm kitchen and a listening ear. Now, sitting in a hospital room where the call button lay forgotten on the floor, Emily realized she didn't know the last time her mother had cooked a full meal for herself, or who she talked to, when the days grew long and the nights grew too quiet. She looked at her again. Really looked. The wrinkles around Helen's mouth were deeper. There were faint age spots along her neck, and her collarbones jutted out more than Emily remembered. There was a tiredness behind her eyes that didn't feel like it was caused just by illness. It felt like something older, something that had been building for a long time. "Mom," Emily said softly, "who's been helping you at home?" Helen's smile reappeared, flimsy but determined. "Oh, I get by. Mrs. Novak next door checks in sometimes. I've got my shows. The bus still gets me to the grocery store. I keep busy." "Busy doing what?" Emily pressed gently. Helen looked toward the window, to the sliver of dusky sky visible through the glass. "Little things," she said. "You know, tidying up, sorting old boxes, going through your father's things. The days fly, honey. You don't have to worry about me." But Emily did worry now, with a sharpness that felt almost too late. "Why didn't you tell me you were feeling sick?" she asked. "You sounded tired last time we talked, but you said you just had a cold. You said you were fine." "I was fine," Helen insisted weakly. "Just a little dizzy now and then. You know how it is when you get older. The body gets cranky." She tried to laugh, but it dissolved quickly into a cough. "Besides, you were working on that big project. You told me how important it was. I didn't want to distract you." There it was again, that word, distract. As if her existence were a pop-up ad she could apologize away. Emily opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. What could she say? That her mother should have demanded more. That she should have insisted Emily come by, call more, show up. "You taught her to stay small," a quiet voice in her mind whispered. "Every time you said, 'I'm busy, Mom. Can we talk later?' you taught her that your time was worth more than hers." Her phone buzzed in her pocket again. Work. Another email, another request, another demand. She silenced it without looking. "Do you remember when you used to come with me to the hospital?" Helen asked suddenly. Emily blinked, pulled from her spiraling thoughts. "When I was a kid?" Helen smiled faintly. "When I did night shifts as a cleaning lady. We'd take the bus together. You'd sit in the break room with your homework while I mopped floors. I'd peek in and see you all curled up with those big textbooks. You were so serious." Emily could almost smell it, the mixture of bleach and coffee that clung to those nights. She remembered the way her mother's shoes squeaked on the polished floors, the way the fluorescent lights made everything look too bright. She remembered patients in beds, family members in chairs, nurses rushing past. Back then, she'd told herself, "One day I'll be on the other side of this, in an office, in charge, never cleaning up other people's messes." She got her wish, but at what cost? "You used to say you were doing all of that for me," Emily murmured. "All those night shifts, all those weekends." Helen's eyes softened. "Of course I did. I wanted you to have choices. I didn't want you to worry about money the way we did. You remember how tight things were sometimes?" "I remember," Emily said quietly. "I also remember you never missing a school play." Helen chuckled, a weak but true sound. "Oh, those plays were terrible." Emily laughed despite herself. "Hey, you were the best part," Helen added. "Even when your mic didn't work. I got someone to cover my shift once, just so I could come. Cost me half a paycheck. Worth every penny." The words lodged in Emily's chest like stones. Her mother had sacrificed wages for those nights, for those moments, for her. And Emily had let conference calls, board meetings, and client dinners stand between her and this woman lying in a hospital bed, apologizing for existing. There was a knock at the door. A woman in her 40s stepped in, holding a tablet and wearing a badge that read, "Lisa Hernandez, medical social worker." "Good evening," she said warmly. "Miss Parker?" She glanced between Emily and Helen. "Daughter?" Emily stood halfway. "Yes, I'm Emily. This is my mother." Lisa nodded and shifted her weight, her expression kind but serious. "Would it be okay if we talk for a few minutes? I've been following your mother's case." Helen gave a little wave. "You can talk around me. I'm not dead yet," she joked weakly. Lisa smiled. "I know, Miss Parker. You're tougher than half the staff here." She moved closer to the bed, adjusting the blanket gently. "But I also know you get tired. So if you want to rest your eyes while I talk with your daughter, that's fine too. We're not hiding anything, okay?" Helen looked at Emily, a question in her eyes, then nodded. "You two go ahead. I'll just listen." Lisa motioned Emily toward the small space by the window, just far enough to speak in low tones without entirely excluding Helen. "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances," Lisa began. "Your mother is, well, she's precious to everyone on this floor, but her situation is complicated." Emily folded her arms reflexively. "Everyone keeps saying that. Complicated, limited, constrained. What does any of that actually mean?" Lisa looked at her carefully, weighing her words. "It means your mother has been falling through the cracks," she said quietly, "and it's not entirely her fault." Emily felt something cold crawl up her spine. "What do you mean, cracks?" Lisa showed her the tablet screen, with lines of notes and dates. "She's been in and out of this hospital a few times in the last year," she explained. "Short stays, dehydration, high blood pressure, a minor fall. Each time we recommended follow-up care, home health aides, assisted living options, nutrition plans, support services, and," Emily pressed, "and each time she either declined or didn't follow through," Lisa said gently. "She told us she didn't want to be a burden. She said she had a daughter who worked very hard, and she didn't want to cause trouble." Emily swallowed hard. The phrase repeated again and again in her mind. Didn't want to be a burden. Didn't want to be a burden. "She has Medicare," Lisa continued, "but there are limits to what it covers. Some of the recommended services required out-of-pocket costs, or at least someone to help navigate the paperwork. We tried calling the number on file to discuss options, but the line was disconnected." Emily stared at the tablet. Next to daughter contact was a phone number with an old area code, one she hadn't used in years. "I changed my number when I moved downtown," she whispered. I must have forgotten to update it here." Lisa's expression didn't turn judgmental. If anything, it turned sadder. "It happens," she said softly. "You'd be surprised how many families we see where the emergency contact is 3 addresses and 2 phone numbers out of date. Life moves fast. People move. Jobs change. But my mother never said anything," Emily said, almost to herself. "She never told me you were calling. She never told me she was here more than once." "Because she's trying to protect you," Lisa replied. "That's what a lot of parents her age do. They downplay everything. They say they're fine when they're not. They don't want to add stress to their children's already busy lives, especially when those children are successful. They feel ashamed, sometimes, that they need help." Emily looked back at the bed. Helen's eyes were half closed, but Emily could tell she was listening. "We did file a concern with Adult Protective Services after the last visit," Lisa continued carefully. Emily's head snapped back toward her. "Wait, what?" "Not an accusation," Lisa said quickly. "A concern. It's protocol when an older adult keeps coming in with certain patterns: dehydration, poor nutrition, medication mismanagement, and no clear support system at home. It doesn't automatically mean abuse. It can mean neglect, or self-neglect, or just falling through the gaps without family realizing how bad things have gotten." The room suddenly felt 2 sizes smaller. Emily's heart pounded in her ears. Neglect. The word hung in the air like a charge. "You're suggesting I neglected my mother?" she asked, her voice low and tight. "I'm suggesting the system failed her," Lisa said softly. "And yes, that includes family, but it also includes overworked doctors, understaffed hospitals, confusing insurance systems, and a society that doesn't make it easy for older adults to get consistent support." She paused, letting it sit. "But there is something else," Lisa added, her voice dropping slightly. "Something your mother has never really talked about, at least not with us. Whenever we bring up certain things, she shuts down, or changes the subject, or says, 'I don't want my daughter to know.'" Emily's breath caught. "Know what?" Lisa glanced at Helen, then back at Emily. "I don't know the full story," she admitted. "I only know that your mother is carrying something heavy, and whatever it is, it's cost her more than her health." A beat of silence passed between them, thick and charged. "Can you feel it? That sensation that there's a deeper story under everything you're seeing? Like a shadow that's always been there, But you're just now noticing the outline? Emily felt it, standing there with the city lights flickering behind her and the hospital monitor beeping steadily. Something had happened in her mother's life, recently, or maybe over years, that went beyond simple old-age problems. Something that involved more than doctors and prescriptions and forgotten phone numbers. Something that involved choices, sacrifices, secrets. Talk to her, Lisa said finally. Really talk to her. Ask the questions you've been too busy or too afraid to ask. She trusts you more than she trusts any of us. If there's a truth she hasn't told, my guess, she's waiting for you to be still long enough to hear it. Lisa slipped out of the room a moment later, leaving Emily staring at her mother with new eyes. Helen shifted on the bed. Did she say I was a bad patient? She asked softly. Emily blinked. No, Mom. She said you were tough. Helen sighed, a tiny sound. Your father used to say that. You're tough, Helen. Tougher than both of us put together. She swallowed. I don't feel tough these days. Emily moved back to the chair and took her mother's hand gently in hers. It was cooler than she expected, the skin thin and papery. Mom, she said, I didn't know you were in and out of here. I didn't know you had falls, or that you weren't eating. I didn't know about any of it. I didn't want you to, Helen murmured. You've got that big job, important people, important things. I didn't want you looking at me the way people look at old folks, like we're the past, like we're a problem to solve. Emily's vision blurred. You're not a problem. Helen looked at her, and for the first time there was something almost like fear in her eyes. There were things I should have told you, she whispered. Things I kept from you so you wouldn't worry. So you could fly. Maybe that was wrong. Emily leaned closer, heart pounding. Tell me now, she pleaded. Please, I want to know everything. Helen squeezed her hand weakly. Not yet, she said. You're tired. I'm tired. We'll talk. We will. I just need to think about where to start. Her eyelids drooped. Within moments her breathing settled into a slow, uneven rhythm. Sleep pulled her under again. Emily sat there, holding her mother's hand, feeling the weight of all the unsaid things pressing in around them. Outside, the city moved on, unaware. Inside, a truth quietly waited, unfinished and unresolved. You know that feeling when you realize you've only been looking at the surface of someone's life, that you might have been walking past the door to their real story for years, too busy to notice it was cracked open. That's where Emily sat now, right in front of that door. And somewhere, behind the machines and the paperwork and the I didn't want to bother you, something much darker and more painful was waiting to come out. She just didn't know yet that, when it did, it wouldn't just change how she saw her mother. It would change how she saw herself. Morning light seeped through the thin hospital curtains, casting pale stripes across the floor and the side of Helen's bed. It wasn't warm light, more like the gray, hesitant glow of a Chicago winter morning that wasn't sure it wanted to begin. Emily hadn't slept. She'd spent most of the night sitting in the same stiff chair, watching her mother breathe, watching shadows shift across the room, watching nurses drift in and out like quiet blue ghosts. Her back ached, her eyes stung, and her throat felt raw from the kind of crying that never quite reaches the surface, the kind that sits behind your ribs and waits. But she didn't leave. For the first time in a long time, work didn't exist. The world outside this room didn't exist. There was only her mother, lying small and silent in a bed that looked too big for her. A soft knock came at the door, and a young nurse peeked in. "Good morning. Need anything?" she whispered. Emily shook her head. "No, thank you." The nurse smiled gently and left. Emily rubbed her hands over her face, trying to gather her thoughts, when a sharp knock suddenly shattered the fragile quiet. The door swung open before Emily could answer. A man stepped in, mid-40s, neatly dressed, designer glasses, expensive coat, a smell of cologne that didn't belong anywhere near a hospital room. He carried a to-go coffee in one hand and irritation in the other. "Finally," he muttered under his breath as he looked at Emily. "You're here." Emily blinked once, twice. Mark, her younger brother, by 3 years and about 5 emotional lifetimes, stood in the doorway with the exasperation of someone who believed he had arrived to clean up someone else's mess. You got the call too? She asked quietly. I got it this morning, he said, stepping inside. Didn't realize they'd been trying to reach us for days. He looked around the room with thinly veiled judgment. And I definitely didn't realize things were this bad. He meant the room. He meant their mother. He meant everything. Emily's shoulders stiffened. Where have you been? Working? He said defensively. Where do you think? Unlike you, I don't exactly have an army of assistants handling my schedule. Emily bit the inside of her cheek. This was exactly why she hated asking anything of him. Everything became a competition. Who worked harder? Who sacrificed more? Who carried the bigger, invisible load? Mark walked to the bed and stared down at their mother, who still hadn't woken up. His face softened for a moment, just a moment, before his jaw tightened again. She looks... God, Em? He swallowed. She looks awful. Yes, Emily said. She does. And no one knew? No one checked? Not even... He stopped himself, but the unfinished accusation hung between them like smoke. Not even you. Emily rose from her chair, anger simmering just below her exhaustion. Don't start, she said quietly. I'm not starting anything, Mark snapped back. I'm just saying. How did this get so far? How did we not know she was in and out of the hospital? Or that she wasn't eating? Or that she fell? Who was even supposed to be checking on her? We both were. Silence. Mark exhaled through his nose and ran a hand through his hair. Look, I'm not trying to fight. I'm really not. This is Mom, and this feels like we failed her. We. Emily noticed that he said we, but everything about his tone felt like you. Before she could respond, another figure appeared in the doorway. A woman in her 60s with a winter coat still draped over her shoulders and a knitted hat pulled low over her forehead. She carried a large grocery tote and had the hurried, anxious look of someone who had run across the parking lot without caring how cold it was. Is she awake? The woman asked, her voice trembling slightly. Emily turned. Mrs. Novak? The neighbor. Please call me Gertrude, the woman said, stepping in. Is she all right? Did the doctor say anything new? I've been so worried. Emily nodded politely. She's stable right now. Still very weak. Gertrude moved to the bed with surprising tenderness, touching the blanket near Helen's leg as if checking it for warmth. Oh, sweetheart, she whispered. You scared me half to death. Emily and Mark exchanged a look, one that said, Why does she seem closer to Mom than we did? You called 911? Emily said. Thank you. If you hadn't, I wasn't about to leave her to suffer alone, Gertrude said emphatically. Then she turned to the siblings, her eyes sharp and honest. Your mother is a proud woman. Too proud. She doesn't ask for help. Ever. Not even when she needs it. Emily's chest tightened. We know. No, Gertrude said gently but firmly. I don't think you do. Mark bristled. What does that mean? It means, she continued, removing her hat and holding it to her chest, that she's been declining for months, maybe a year. The dizziness, the weight loss, those bruises on her arms, the days she just didn't come out of her apartment. Emily froze. Bruises, weight loss, dizziness. How long? She whispered. Gertrude hesitated. Long enough that I started knocking every morning to make sure she was all right. Some days she didn't answer until the 6th or 7th try. Sometimes she'd laugh it off, say she overslept, but other times she looked down, her voice catching. Sometimes she just looked so tired. Emily felt Mark shift beside her, whether out of shame or frustration she couldn't tell. Why didn't she tell us? Emily murmured. Why didn't she call? Because she didn't want you to worry, Gertrude replied. She always said you were both busy, important. She didn't want to interrupt your lives. There it was again. That brutal word. Interrupt. As if her needs were a ringing phone, they were allowed to silence. Before anyone could speak again, another voice entered the room. Rough, impatient, slightly louder than necessary. Well, looks like the whole family finally crawled out of wherever they were hiding. A man stepped in. Late 50s, hospital badge clipped to his belt, stethoscope around his neck. He carried the air of someone perpetually overworked and perpetually irritated. "Dr. Rowan." Emily straightened. "Are you my mother's doctor?" "One of them," he said. "She's been bounced between departments because we had trouble sorting out her paperwork and medical history. But I've been overseeing the last 2 days." "Is she improving?" Mark asked. Rowan shrugged. "Hard to say. She came in dehydrated, malnourished, with unstable blood pressure and irregular heart rhythms. We've stabilized the immediate issues, but underlying factors are still unclear." "Underlying factors," Emily repeated. "Like what?" Rowan's eyes flicked toward Helen. "She's been under stress, and she's not been taking her medications regularly." Emily's stomach dropped. "She always took her meds." "No," Rowan said bluntly. "She didn't." Emily blinked. "How do you know?" "Because half the prescriptions we found in her bag were months overdue for refill. Some bottles were full. Some were missing several pills at once." He looked directly at Emily. "Someone wasn't managing her medications properly." Emily felt heat crawl up her neck. Mark stepped forward. "Are you implying that's our fault?" Rowan held up his hands. "I'm not implying anything. I'm telling you what the chart shows. Your mother has been trying to hold herself together alone, and she's failing. That's what happens when older adults insist they're fine when they're not." Emily pressed her fingers to her temple. The pieces were stacking up into a picture she didn't want to see. Before she could gather herself, Dr. Rowan added, "And according to the social worker's notes, this isn't the first time she's had issues with medication mismanagement." Emily looked at the floor. Her throat ached. Gertrude stepped in then, her voice protective. "Don't blame the children. Their mother hid things. She hid a lot." Rowan sighed heavily. "Yes, she did. But someone needs to take responsibility now." Emily and Mark exchanged another look, this one sharper, heavier. "I will," Emily said. The words came out faster than she expected. "I'll take care of everything. Her meds, her appointments, whatever she needs." Mark gave a slight nod, though something in his expression suggested he didn't entirely believe her. "Good," Rowan said, jotting something on his clipboard. "Because we need answers before discharge. She can't go home without a care plan." "Discharge?" Emily repeated. "Already?" "We don't keep patients longer than necessary," he said. "And insurance won't allow extended stays unless absolutely justified." He turned to leave, but paused. "There's something else," he said quietly. "Your mother said something odd when she first came in. She was confused, disoriented." Emily felt her pulse quicken. "What did she say?" Rowan hesitated, then spoke slowly. "She said she didn't want them to know where she was." "Them?" Mark repeated. "Who's them?" Rowan shook his head. "She wouldn't say, or she couldn't articulate it. But she seemed afraid." Emily felt her heart stop. Afraid? Helen Parker? Afraid of someone? Afraid of who? Afraid of what? Rowan continued. "She also kept mentioning someone taking things from her apartment. Papers, money, something about signing something she didn't understand." Emily went cold. "What kind of papers?" she whispered. "We don't know," Rowan answered. "When we asked, she shut down, said she didn't want to get anyone in trouble, especially not her children." Silence fell, heavy, viscous, uncomfortable. Gertrude clutched her grocery tote to her chest. "She said something like that to me once," she murmured, "about someone asking her to sign things. I thought she meant the leasing office or the electric company." Emily's hands trembled. Mark paced toward the window. "Who the hell would ask Mom to sign anything? She barely leaves her apartment." Gertrude hesitated. "She mentioned a woman once, or someone who said they were helping her with mail. A kind person, she called her. But every time I asked for details, she changed the subject." Emily's skin prickled. Something was very wrong. Someone had been in her mother's life. Someone they didn't know. Someone who asked her to sign papers. Someone she was afraid of. And that someone might still be out there. Emily's voice was barely a whisper. "I need to talk to her. Alone." Gertrude nodded respectfully. Dr. Rowan gave a curt nod and left. Even Mark stepped back, folding his arms as he observed her carefully. Emily moved to the bed and sat beside her mother. Mom, she whispered, we need to talk when you wake up. I need you to tell me everything. Whoever hurt you, whoever scared you, I'm going to find out. Helen didn't wake, but her fingers twitched slightly, as if reaching for something in a dream, and Emily realized, with a cold certainty, there wasn't just neglect here. There wasn't just aging or loneliness or forgotten phone numbers. There was a secret, a dangerous one her mother had been carrying alone, terrified, silent, and unprotected, and Emily had no idea yet how deep that secret went, but she was about to find out. The hallway outside Helen's room smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant, the kind of smell that clings to your clothes and follows you home. Emily stepped out into it because she needed air, needed space to think, to breathe, to keep from drowning in the rising tide of dread swelling inside her chest. She leaned against the wall, pressing her palms flat against the cool paint. Last night had been an emotional avalanche. This morning felt worse, like standing in the rubble and realizing the mountain hadn't finished falling. Something had happened to her mother. Something ugly, something hidden, something no one had wanted to talk about. Not the doctors, not the neighbor, not even her mother herself. But now that Emily knew the cracks were there, she couldn't unsee them. Behind her she heard voices, quiet, tight, overlapping. Mark and Gertrude. "Do you really think someone took advantage of her?" Mark asked. He wasn't shouting, but he wasn't whispering either. His tone carried the brittle defensiveness of someone who didn't want the answer to be yes. "I think she was overwhelmed," Gertrude said. "People like your mother, they don't like to admit they're struggling, and some people prey on that." "What kind of people?" Gertrude paused. "Caretakers, scammers, even family sometimes." Silence. A long one. Emily closed her eyes. When she re-entered the room, she found Mark standing at the foot of the bed, arms folded, staring at their mother like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. Gertrude sat in the corner chair, wringing her hat between her hands. "We need to figure out what happened," Emily said, voice steady despite the turmoil swirling inside her. "We need answers." "From who?" Mark shot back. "Mom barely talks about anything important. She always glosses things over." "I'm fine, honey. Don't worry about me. I handled it. How are we supposed to get the truth out of her now?" He wasn't wrong, but the way he said it made something flare inside Emily. "She doesn't talk because she didn't want to burden us," Emily said sharply. "Because we made her feel like she couldn't." Mark's eyes narrowed. "Don't put that on me." "I'm not putting it on you," Emily said. "I'm putting it on both of us." Gertrude stood, lifting her hand slightly. "Children, please." But it was too late. The tension snapped like a fragile thread pulled too tight. "You're acting like you're the only one who cares," Mark said. "Like you're the only one who works. I have responsibilities too, Em. A family, a mortgage, a job that depends on me showing up on time, not dropping everything whenever Mom needs something." "She didn't need something, Mark. She needed us, and we weren't there." His jaw clenched. "I didn't know, okay?" "Neither did I." Their eyes locked, two guilty children standing over the consequences of their absence. Then Mark looked away, exhaling sharply. "Fine. What now?" Emily ran a hand through her hair. "Now we retrace her last few weeks. We talk to her neighbors. We look through her apartment. We find those papers she mentioned." Gertrude nodded. "I can help. I know her building manager, and I've seen some people around. Deliveries, helpers, a woman who came by a few times." Emily's pulse quickened. "A woman?" Gertrude hesitated. "I don't know her name. She was younger, maybe late 20s, always dressed nicely, too nicely. She'd come with envelopes sometimes." "Your mother always looked nervous when she showed up." Mark swore under his breath. Emily felt her stomach twist. Why would Mom need help sorting mail? Gertrude paused again. She said her eyesight was getting worse, that she couldn't read the fine print sometimes. Emily's throat tightened. Helen had always kept her glasses nearby, had always been meticulous about bills and documents. For her to ask someone else to help meant things were much worse than any of them realized. "We're going to Mom's apartment," Emily said. "Today." Mark blinked. "We can't just leave the hospital." "She's stable," Emily said. She's asleep, and whatever happened to her started at home. If we want answers, that's where we'll find them." Gertrude nodded quickly. "I'll give you my spare key. Your mother trusted me with it." The idea both comforted and stung. Emily took the key. "Thank you." Before they could leave, Helen stirred suddenly, eyes fluttering, hand twitching toward the edge of the blanket. Emily rushed to her side. "Mom! Mom, can you hear me?" Helen blinked, pupils searching, confused. Then they softened as they focused on her daughter. "Emmy?" she whispered, voice raspy. Where are you going?" Emily brushed a hand against her mother's forehead. "We're just stepping out for a little bit, Mom. We'll be back soon. I promise." Helen's eyes widened with something close to panic. "No! Don't go to the apartment." The room froze. Gertrude stiffened. Mark looked up sharply. Emily swallowed. "Why not, Mom?" Helen's breathing quickened. "Please, don't look. Don't open the drawer." "What drawer?" But Helen squeezed her eyes shut, as if even saying the words brought back something painful. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." Emily reached for her hand. "Mom!" But Helen's vitals monitor beeped sharply, and a nurse rushed in. "She's anxious," the nurse said firmly. "Let's give her a moment. She needs rest." As the nurse soothed Helen, Emily stepped back, shaken. "Don't look. Don't open the drawer. I'm sorry." None of those were normal responses. None of them were the words of a woman who had simply fallen or forgotten her medications. These were the words of someone who was afraid, someone carrying a secret too heavy for her fragile body to hold. And Emily suddenly knew with absolute certainty, whatever was in that drawer, whatever her mother didn't want her to see, was the center of all this. She felt it in her bones. "Let's go," she said quietly, turning toward the door. A winter wind pushed hard against the hospital windows as evening wrapped itself around the building. The sky outside had gone from gray to ink black, and the city lights below flickered like distant warnings. Emily sat by her mother's hospital bed again, her body exhausted, but her mind sharp and restless. Something inside her, some internal gear long rusted from neglect, was turning again. She wasn't leaving. Not tonight. She had promised her mother she would stay, and for once in her life, she meant it with her whole chest. Helen slept deeply, her chest rising and falling in soft, fragile waves. The beeping of the heart monitor was steady now, but Emily could still hear the fear in her mother's voice echoing inside her head. "Please, don't go to the apartment. Don't open the drawer. I'm sorry." Sorry for what? Sorry to whom? Sorry about a drawer? No part of it made sense. Not yet. A nurse came in to check the vitals, scanning the monitors with the routine urgency of someone who had already seen everything twice today. "She's resting better now," the nurse murmured. "Her pressure has stabilized." Emily nodded but didn't speak. She didn't trust her voice. When the nurse left, the room fell into a heavy, uneasy silence. A silence filled with waiting. Waiting for what? Emily didn't know. But something in her was bracing for it. Her mother shifted slightly in her sleep, murmuring something unintelligible. Emily stood, adjusting the blanket over her shoulders, the way her mother used to tuck Emily in on cold nights long ago. The motion was small, but it hurt more than she expected. Where had she been? Where had she gone all these years? Why had she let herself drift so far? A sound in the hallway snapped her attention up. Two nurses whispered near the door, nothing unusual, but their voices carried a tense edge. "Did you see that?" one murmured. "Yeah, and Dr. Rowan's not happy. It's a mess. They're understaffed again. Things are slipping. Slipping. Someone on this floor nearly got the wrong medication tonight." Emily stiffened. Wrong medication. On this floor. The nurses continued down the hall, unaware they were being overheard, but their conversation left a cold ripple in Emily's spine. Things weren't just failing at home. They were failing here, too, in the very place meant to keep her mother safe. She crossed her arms tightly, unwilling to let fear take over. But it did anyway, wrapping itself around her like a cold scarf. Hours passed. Mark had gone home to check on his daughter. Gertrude had promised to keep an eye on the apartment door and call if she saw anything unusual. Now it was just Emily and her mother. And the night. A low groan came from the bed. Helen stirred, pushing weakly at the blanket. "Mom?" Emily whispered. Helen didn't respond, but her breathing changed. Shallower, faster. Her lips moved slightly. Emily leaned close, hoping for words, hoping for something she could turn into answers. Nothing came. She sank back in the chair, letting exhaustion drag her deeper into her thoughts. Then a soft knock broke through the quiet. The door opened just enough for a tall, thin man in a faded maintenance uniform to slip inside. He carried a mop bucket and a spray bottle, and his shoes squeaked faintly on the tile. His badge read, "Trevor Facilities, Chapersha, Night Shift." Trevor's face was young, late 20s, maybe early 30s, but tired, eyes dark from too many graveyard shifts. He paused when he saw Emily awake. "Oh, sorry," he said quietly. "Didn't mean to bother you, just cleaning." She nodded politely. "It's okay." He started mopping the corner, humming faintly to himself. Then he paused again, glancing toward Helen with a strange expression. "That lady," he murmured. "She's been here before, hasn't she?" Emily sat up straighter. "What do you mean?" Trevor shrugged. "I've seen her a few times this month. Not long stays, maybe a night or two. She always looks scared when she comes in. Not sick scared, something else scared." Emily felt her blood freeze. "What kind of something else?" Trevor hesitated, looked at the door, lowered his voice, like she's hiding from someone. Emily's chest tightened. "Did she say anything to you?" "Not to me," he said, shaking his head. "But once. She told another nurse she didn't want that woman visiting her anymore. Said the woman was pushing things on her. Papers, forms." Emily's heart sank. The woman Gertrude mentioned. The envelopes. The unexplained fear. The drawer her mother begged her not to open. Trevor cleared his throat. "Look, I shouldn't get involved. I'm just the cleaning guy. But the last time she was here, she cried. A lot. Kept saying she didn't want to lose her home. She didn't want them to take it." He shook his head. "I don't know who they are," Emily whispered, barely breathing. "Neither do I." Trevor finished mopping and headed for the door. "Take care of her," he said softly. Then he disappeared, leaving the smell of cleaning solution behind. Emily's legs trembled. Her mother was afraid of losing more than her health. She was afraid of losing her life, her home, her security, everything she'd worked for. And someone had been circling her, taking advantage of her age, her kindness, her failing eyesight, her isolation. Someone who might have already taken something. Her heart pounded painfully. What if the drawer held the evidence? What if everything her mother was too afraid to tell her was there? What if this wasn't just neglect or loneliness, but exploitation? The clock on the wall read 2:17 a.m. Emily stood. She couldn't sit anymore. She moved to the window, staring out at the city, feeling the weight of every unanswered question pressing down on her. Behind her, the IV pump beeped softly. Helen stirred again. Emily turned. And this time, her mother's eyes were open, truly open, clearer, more focused than before. "Emmy?" Helen whispered, voice small but steady. Emily rushed to her side. "I'm here, Mom. I'm right here." Helen blinked slowly, her gaze drifting to the ceiling as if reading invisible memories. "I didn't want you to see what happened," she murmured. "I didn't want you to think badly of me." Emily took her hand gently. "Mom, nothing you did could make me think badly of you. You're my mother." Helen swallowed hard. "I just wanted to protect you." "Protect me from what?" Silence. A long, trembling silence. Helen's eyes filled with tears. "The drawer," she whispered. "Everything. Everything's in the drawer." Emily's breath caught. "What's in it, Mom?" Her mother's lips parted, but no sound came. Her breathing quickened. Panic fluttered in her chest. Emily tried again, softer. "Mom, did someone hurt you?" A single tear slid down Helen's cheek. Then faintly she whispered a name Emily had never heard before. But before Emily could ask anything else, Helen's breath hitched. Her eyes rolled slightly, and the monitor spiked sharply. "Mom!" Emily cried out. "Nurse! I need a nurse!" Two nurses rushed in, followed by a doctor, and Emily was gently pushed aside as they stabilized her mother, adjusting oxygen, checking vitals, murmuring instructions. Emily watched helplessly, her heart tearing open as the truth slipped away from her again, just out of reach. When the room settled again, when her mother's breathing returned to its fragile rhythm, the doctor spoke quietly. "She's exhausted," he said, "mentally and physically. Let her rest. Rest. Rest while a threat hid somewhere in her life. Rest while secrets rotted in a drawer. Rest while someone out there still had what belonged to her." Emily sat down slowly, covering her mouth with both hands. She wasn't sleeping tonight. She wasn't moving. Not until she knew the truth. Her mother had given her enough pieces to know this wasn't just a misunderstanding. Someone had targeted her mother. Someone had tricked her. Someone had taken advantage. And tomorrow, Emily would find the drawer. But tonight, she would sit vigil, watching, waiting, guarding the woman who had spent her entire life guarding her. And as the night stretched on, Emily realized with growing certainty, this wasn't just a hospital stay. It was the beginning of a reckoning. Morning didn't arrive gently. It hit the hospital room in a cold, sterile beam of light that sliced across the bed, across the machines, across Emily's face as she blinked her tired eyes open. She had finally dozed off around 5 a.m., sitting upright in the chair, her neck aching and her fingers still curled around the edge of her mother's blanket. Now her phone buzzed with a dozen notifications, work emails she ignored instantly, a call from Mark she let go to voicemail, and a text from Gertrude. "I'm at the apartment building. Something you should see." Emily's heart kicked, but she couldn't leave yet. Not until she knew her mother was stable again, and not until she faced what was coming. Voices drifted through the doorway, nurses changing shift, carts squeaking past, morning rounds beginning. But then came a voice she recognized. A tight voice. An irritated voice. "Mark." The door swung open sharply. What the hell is going on?" he demanded, not bothering to lower his volume. Emily straightened, rubbing her stiff neck. "Good morning to you too." "Don't do that," he snapped. "Don't act cool. Don't act like you've got everything under control. We have a serious situation here, and I'm trying to figure out what we're walking into." She glared at him. "Lower your voice. Mom is resting." He bristled, but his tone dropped a notch. "Gertrude texted me too. Something about people going in and out of Mom's building last night. And get this, the building manager found someone trying to access the mailboxes. Someone who didn't live there." Emily's pulse spiked. "Did they see who it was?" "No. Security cameras in that hallway have been broken for months." Mark ran a hand through his hair. "This is getting out of control. Someone was messing with her mail, Em. That's federal crime territory. Federal. Criminal. Real danger, not imagined, not the fog of confusion." Emily felt the room tilt slightly. Mark took a step toward her. "We need to figure out who that woman is. The one Gertrude mentioned. The one Trevor overheard Mom complaining about. She didn't just show up for tea. She was after something." Emily exhaled slowly. "I'm going to the apartment today. We need to see that drawer." Mark shook his head fiercely. "Not without me." She raised an eyebrow. "Since when do you want to help?" His jaw tensed. "Since 5 minutes ago, when I realized Mom might have been exploited and we were too busy to notice." Emily swallowed. Something in his voice cracked. Something scared. Guilty. Raw. "I'll go with you," he repeated. "You're not doing this alone." Before Emily could answer, a figure appeared in the doorway. Lisa, the social worker. She stepped inside with a gentle smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good morning," she said softly, closing the door behind her. "I wanted to check in with you both." Emily nodded. "We're glad you're here." Lisa moved closer to Helen's bed, checking the monitors with a quiet professionalism. Then she turned back to the siblings. "You two look exhausted," she said with a small chuckle. "Hospital nights will do that." Emily crossed her arms. "We need answers." Lisa nodded slowly. "And I promise you'll get them. But first, I need to tell you something important." Mark leaned forward. "What now?" Lisa sighed, almost bracing herself. "Your mother was approved for a financial review with Adult Protective Services last month." Emily froze. "Financial review? For what?" "For suspicious activity," Lisa said carefully. withdrawals she didn't normally make, signatures that didn't match her medical paperwork, a request to alter her lease, and something about a pending loan application she denied making. Emily's blood went cold. "A loan?" Mark repeated. "Mom doesn't take loans. She hates debt." Lisa nodded. "Exactly, which is why the bank flagged it." Emily's hand went to her mouth. "Dear God," Lisa continued, her voice softer now, "your mother refused a full investigation. She said she didn't want to cause trouble. She also said she trusted the person who brought her the paperwork." Emily whispered, "The woman?" Lisa nodded. "And there's more," she added. "A neighbor, not Gertrude, another one, saw someone leaving your mother's apartment a few weeks ago. She thought it was a home health aide. She assumed everything was normal." Emily's skin prickled. Why would someone pose as an aide unless they wanted access, unless they wanted signatures? Mark swore under his breath and paced the room. So someone targeted her, took advantage of her age, her trust, her eyesight. Possibly, Lisa agreed. "We've seen cases like this before. Elder financial exploitation is more common than people think." Emily felt a sudden surge of nausea. Did we cause this? By not being around? Lisa looked at her, eyes softening. "No, the person who did this is responsible. But yes, your mother was vulnerable. And she hid it from you to protect you." Emily sank into the chair. Her hands trembled. Mark stood by the window, shoulders tight, jaw clenched. Lisa's tone shifted gently. "Your mother is very protective of you both. She blames herself before she blames anyone else. She's been carrying something alone for a long time. You can't change the past, but you can help her now." Silence, heavy, charged, unspoken truths sitting between them. Then Helen stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, hazy but aware. She saw Lisa first, then Mark, then finally Emily. "Good morning, sweetheart," she whispered weakly. Emily moved closer. "Hi, Mom. How are you feeling?" Helen gave a tiny smile. "Like I'm 90 instead of 78. Lisa stepped forward. "Helen, we need to talk about your apartment." Helen's smile faded instantly. Her chest rose sharply. No, I don't want—" "It's okay," Lisa soothed. "Your children want to help you, that's all." Helen shook her head frantically. No, leave it alone, please." Emily grasped her hand gently. "Mom, we're going. We have to. We need to know what happened." Helen's eyes flooded with terror. Pure terror. "Emmy, don't open that drawer." Emily swallowed. "Why?" Tears pooled in Helen's eyes. Because I'm ashamed." Emily's heart cracked. "Of what?" Helen opened her mouth, but then quickly shook her head, turning away. Please don't make me say it." Emily brushed a tear from her mother's cheek. "Mom, someone hurt you. Someone used you. We need to know who." Helen squeezed her eyes shut. "She was nice at first. So kind. She said she wanted to help me. She said the forms were just for rent assistance. She said I'd lose the apartment if I didn't sign." Emily's entire body went numb. "Who?" she whispered. "Who was she?" Helen trembled. "Her name was—" But suddenly her monitor beeped sharply again. Her breathing hitched. Tears spilled unchecked down her face. "I can't," she choked out. "I'm so sorry, I can't." Lisa stepped in quickly. "It's okay, Helen. You don't have to force it. Let's take a break." Helen covered her face with her hands, thin, trembling hands that had once held Emily steady through every childhood storm. "I'm sorry," she whispered over and over. "I'm so sorry." Emily pressed a hand against her mother's shoulder, whispering soothing words she didn't believe. Mark stood in the corner, face pale, fists clenched. Lisa touched his arm gently. "Let her rest. She's overwhelmed." Emily nodded slowly. Then she leaned close to her mother. "We're going to fix this," she whispered. "Whoever did this to you, they're not getting away with it." Helen sobbed quietly, and Emily knew, with a clarity sharper than anything she'd felt in years, that the next step wasn't in the hospital. It was in the apartment, in the drawer, in the papers someone made her mother sign. Mark met her eyes across the room. "We go now." he said. Emily nodded once, and the truth, whatever it was, finally felt close enough to touch. By the time Emily and Mark got back to the hospital, the winter sky outside the windows had already started to turn the color of bruised steel. The elevator ride up felt longer than it had any right to be, the numbers above the door ticking from one floor to the next like a countdown neither of them was ready for. Neither of them spoke. They didn't have to. The manila folder in Emily's hands said everything. It was thick, too thick. The edges were soft from being handled too many times, creased in places where someone's fingers had trembled as they opened it. Someone who lived alone, someone who trusted too easily, someone who hadn't wanted to cause trouble, someone like Helen. When the elevator doors slid open on the 4th floor, the hospital felt quieter than it had all day. The beeping monitors, the footsteps, the rolling carts, all of it seemed muffled, distant, like the world had moved a few inches away while they were gone. Emily's chest felt tight. Mark walked slightly ahead of her, his steps fast and uneven. His usual confidence had been replaced by something rawer. Fear, anger, shame all tangled together. "Are you sure we should show her everything?" he asked, not looking back. Emily swallowed. She's the one who lived it. She deserves to have somebody finally say it out loud. He exhaled through his nose. "Yeah, I just don't know if I'm madder at the woman who did this to her, or at us for not seeing it sooner. Maybe you know that feeling too, when the truth finally shows up, and it hits you that the clues were there all along. You just chose to look the other way because looking was inconvenient." That's where they were now. Emily pushed open the door to room 416. Helen was awake. She lay propped up slightly against the pillows, a thin blanket pulled to her chest. Her hair was brushed back loosely, and someone had found her glasses and cleaned them, but the lenses did nothing to hide the fear in her eyes when she saw her children walk in. Not relief. Fear. Emily's heart cracked. "Hi, Mom," she said softly. Helen's gaze dropped instantly to the folder in Emily's hands. Her fingers twitched against the blanket. "Oh," she whispered. You went." Emily didn't lie. "We did." Mark closed the door behind them and leaned against it, arms crossed tight. Gertrude wasn't there. Lisa wasn't there. No nurses hovered near the machines. It was just the three of them now, mother and children, with 30 years of unfinished conversations floating around them like dust motes in the hospital air. Emily moved closer to the bed and set the folder down on the rolling tray. "We went to the apartment," she said quietly. "We used the key you gave Mrs. Novak. We checked the drawer you begged us not to open." Helen's breathing hitched. She started, but her voice failed her. Emily slid the folder open. Inside, neatly stacked but worn, were papers. Dozens of them. Letters, bank statements, printed emails, contracts with fine print so small it felt like a trap all by itself, and forms with signatures. Signatures that looked too shaky, too rushed, too unlike the confident loops Helen used to sign permission slips and school forms when Emily was little. Emily picked up the top document and held it gently. "Mom," she said, her voice trembling despite her effort to control it. "What is this?" Helen turned her face away, eyes filling with tears. Emily glanced down at the page. It was a financial assistance agreement. At least that's what the bold letters at the top claimed. But buried in the dense paragraphs was something else. Authorization for automatic withdrawals, permission to act on the client's behalf, a clause about property liens in the case of unpaid balances, and on the bottom, in blue ink, the name, Helen M. Parker. Her signature, her shaky, vulnerable signature. Emily put the page down and picked up another, a letter from the bank. "Suspicious activity. Unusual withdrawal pattern. Please contact us immediately." A third, a copy of a lease modification she'd never seen before. An addendum, a clause about non-related authorized occupants and co-signing parties. Mark finally spoke, his voice low and tight. "She was using Mom's apartment address to send everything," he said. "Nothing came to us, not a word." Emily nodded, feeling nauseous. "And the return address?" He gave a humorless little laugh. "It's not an address, it's a P.O. box." Of course it was. Mom, Emily said, turning back to her. Who was she? Helen pressed her lips together, her chest rising and falling faster now. Her name was Claire, she whispered finally. She said she worked with people like me, seniors. She said she was an advocate. The word advocate tasted like poison now. How did you meet her? Emily asked. Helen stared at the ceiling. At the clinic. She had a badge, a clipboard. She said she noticed I was confused by some forms. Apparently I signed something wrong once. She helped fix it. Or at least, that's what she said. Emily's grip on the folder tightened. You can probably guess what happened next, right? The help that keeps going just far enough to cross a line. The kind person who keeps coming back with more papers, more promises, more fine print. Helen swallowed. She started visiting the apartment. She continued. She said she could help lower my bills, get me more benefits. Said there were programs for people like me, old, alone. She let out a shaky laugh that didn't sound like a laugh at all. I told her I didn't want charity. She said it wasn't charity. She said it was what I deserved. Mark's jaw clenched. And she just kept showing up? Helen nodded weakly. Every few weeks, always with envelopes, always with sticky notes on the pages. Sign here, she'd say, and here, and here. She'd talk fast, move the papers around, tell me not to worry about the details. That's what I'm here for, she'd say. I do the worrying so you don't have to. Emily felt something hot sting behind her eyes. How long? She whispered. How long did this go on, Mom? Almost a year, Helen said, voice barely audible. Maybe longer. Time gets blurry when every day looks the same. Mark pushed away from the door and stepped closer, his face pale. Did you ever ask her to stop? He asked. Helen closed her eyes. I did. Once. I told her I didn't like signing things I didn't understand. She got different. Not mean, just colder. She reminded me that without her help, I could lose the apartment. She said I was already behind, that things were complicated, that I didn't have anyone else to explain things to me. Emily's stomach twisted. Behind on what? On rent? Helen hesitated. This was it. The moment where the surface story, the one about a scammer and some shady forms, gave way to something deeper, something much more personal, something that wasn't just about Claire, something that was about them. Emily's voice grew softer. Mom, why were you behind? Helen's eyes filled so completely with tears that for a moment, Emily couldn't see the color of them. Because I was helping you, she whispered. The world tilted. What? Emily asked. Helen looked at her daughter, really looked at her, with a kind of aching tenderness that cut straight through Emily's chest. You remember when you started your first firm? Helen asked. When you left that big company and went out on your own? Emily blinked. That was 7 years ago. You told me you were fine, Helen said. You said you had savings, investors, a plan. You were so brave, so proud. But I heard your voice those first months, Emmy. I heard how tired you were, how scared. You tried to hide it, but I'm your mother. I hear what you don't say. Emily's heart pounded. Mom, I never asked you for anything. I know, Helen said. You never do. You're too proud, just like your father. Her gaze drifted past Emily, like she was looking at a memory instead. I went to the bank, she continued. I asked about a small line of credit, just enough to have something in case you fell, in case something went wrong and you needed a safety net. I thought, if I had it there, I could help without you feeling guilty. Quietly, like parents do. Emily shook her head in disbelief. You never told me that. Helen smiled faintly. You were busy. You were building something. I didn't want you to look back while you were still climbing. Emily's throat ached. So I took on a little debt, Helen said softly. Then a little more. It was supposed to be temporary, but my checks didn't stretch as far. The rent went up, groceries went up, medication went up, everything went up except me. She let out a breath that sounded more like a sob. I told myself it was fine, that I could handle it. I'd always handled everything. I'd worked nights at this very hospital just to keep a roof over our heads. So what was a few more forms? A few more papers? A few more signatures? Mark looked stunned. Mom, did you take out loans to help Emily's business? She shook her head slowly. No, I never got that far. The bank said my income was too low, my age too high. Risk factors, they called it. That's when I met Claire. She said she knew other ways. She said she knew programs that rewarded people like me. She said she could help rearrange things so I wouldn't lose everything. Emily felt sick. She told me housing prices were rising. Helen went on. That greedy landlords could raise my rent any time and I'd be out on the street. She said I needed protection. So when she put the papers in front of me and said, "Sign here if you want to keep your home," I signed. Emily's hand flew to her mouth. What she didn't tell me, Helen whispered, was that some of those papers gave her access to my accounts, that she could manage my bills, that there were fees, penalties, tiny little numbers that bled me dry 1 month at a time. Mark swore under his breath, pacing toward the window and back. She told me not to worry, Helen continued. Every time I asked, she'd say, "You're fine, I'm taking care of it. That's what you're paying me for." Paying her, she corrected herself bitterly, to take what little I had. Emily's body shook. Mom, why didn't you tell me any of this? Helen's eyes brimmed with tears again. Because you were finally living the life I'd worked my whole life to give you, she said simply. You had meetings, clients, a beautiful office downtown. I saw you on those video calls. With your crisp shirts and your confident voice, you looked like everything I ever wanted for you. She took a breath that rattled painfully. Do you know what it's like to be an old woman in a small apartment, watching her daughter on a screen in a big glass building, and thinking, I did it. I got her there? Her voice cracked. I didn't want to pull you back into my little world of bounce checks and overdue notices. I didn't want you to feel responsible for me, after everything I did to make sure you weren't. Emily's tears finally spilled over. Mom, she whispered, I would have helped. I wanted to help. Helen shook her head. I heard your voice, Emmy. You remember that night? The night you called me from the office, crying in the bathroom so nobody would hear? Emily swallowed a lump in her throat. She did remember. She remembered her mascara running, her palms shaking, her fear that the whole company would collapse before it even began. You said, Helen continued softly, I never want to be poor again. I never want to go back to that life. Emily closed her eyes, shame slamming into her like a wave. I knew what you meant, Helen said. You didn't mean you were ashamed of me. You meant you were ashamed of how hard it was, of how scared we'd been sometimes. But all I heard in that moment was, I can't go back there. I can't go back to her world. Her voice broke. So I decided, she whispered, that if poverty was coming for me again, it was going to come for me alone, not for you. The silence in the room was thick enough to choke on. Mark wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, turning away for a moment. Emily could barely breathe. Mom, she said, voice shaking, you were never a burden. Never. You were my entire foundation. You were the reason I got out. The reason I became what I became. Helen shook her head weakly. I'm the reason you felt you had to be strong all the time. I never wanted that for you. I wanted you to feel safe enough to be soft, to fall apart, to ask for help. But all you saw was me pushing through. You thought that's what you had to be, too. Emily sank to her knees beside the bed, her head near her mother's hand. Then things got worse, Helen whispered. The bills, the fees, the rent. I tried to keep up. I skipped meals, I stretched medication. I told myself it was just until you got over the hump at work, just until your big project closed, just until you had more time. She smiled sadly. But for people like me, time is the first thing that runs out. Emily let out a quiet, broken sound. And then, Helen continued, her eyes distant, when I finally realized something was wrong, really wrong, I got scared, not of being poor. I'd been poor before. I got scared of you finding out I'd been stupid, that I'd been tricked, that I'd let someone play me. She locked eyes with Emily. I wasn't ashamed of being old, she whispered. I was ashamed of being foolish. Emily shook her head fiercely. You weren't foolish. You were alone. That's not the same thing. Helen gave a bitter little laugh. Alone and proud is a dangerous combination. We make great targets. Mark stepped closer to the bed, his voice hoarse. Mom, how much did she take? Helen blinked slowly. Most of it, she admitted. The savings from when your father died. The little emergency fund I kept in an envelope in the drawer. The refund check from the insurance company. Little drips at first. Then, bigger ones. Emily thought of the bank letters, the red stamps, the cold language of outstanding balances, and immediate attention required. She told me not to call the bank, Helen went on. Said it would confuse things. Said it would make it harder to keep me in the system. So I didn't. I listened to her instead of you. She closed her eyes in shame. I didn't tell you because I knew the first thing you'd do would be call a lawyer and blow everything wide open. And then you'd look at me and see not your strong mother, but some old lady who fell for a scam. Tears slipped down her temples into her hair. I couldn't bear that. Emily's voice cracked. So you protected me from feeling disappointed by sacrificing everything you had left? Helen let out a trembling breath. Mothers do foolish things, she whispered. We take the hit if it means our children get to keep believing their world is solid. Emily bowed her head against the blanket, her shoulders shaking. Mom, your world is supposed to be solid too, she choked out. I was so busy building something big that I didn't notice the foundation I was standing on was crumbling underneath you. Helen's fingers moved weakly until they bumped against Emily's hair. She patted it gently, the way she used to when Emily was 5 and had scraped her knee. You were shining, she whispered. I didn't want you to dim your light for me. Emily looked up at her, eyes red, mascara smeared. I would have sat in the dark with you, she said, if it meant you weren't alone. The monitor beeped steadily, filling the silence that followed. Mark cleared his throat. We're going to fix this, Mom, he said, his voice rough but determined. We're going to the bank. We're calling the police. We're finding this woman. Helen flinched. I don't want trouble. You already have trouble, Emily said gently. The difference now is, you don't have it alone. Helen's eyes searched her daughter's face as if trying to decide whether or not to believe her. Finally, with a small, exhausted sigh, Helen nodded. I kept one thing, she whispered. From her. I didn't sign it. I pretended I did, but I didn't. It's in the back of the drawer, taped to the bottom. She wanted me to sign over something bigger. Emily's heart stopped. What? She whispered. What did she want? Helen hesitated, then met her daughter's eyes. You, she said softly. She wanted access to you, to your accounts, your information. She knew you were successful. She wanted me to give her the doorway into your world. Emily felt her stomach plummet. She thought if she got to me, Helen continued, she could get to you. She said, your daughter is a big fish. We can help her too. And I told her, no, absolutely not. I'd already lost too much. I wasn't giving her my child. A tear slipped down Emily's cheek. In the end, Helen whispered, that's the only thing I did right. It hit Emily like a wave then. Her mother had lost money, security, pride, health, but she had drawn the line at her child. Even after all the years Emily had been absent, distracted, busy, running so fast she forgot the hands that pushed her forward, Helen had still chosen to protect her, even if it meant losing everything else. If you're watching this, can you feel that? That punch-in-the-gut realization that someone has been bleeding quietly in the background of your life so you could keep shining in the foreground. That's where Emily was now, kneeling beside a hospital bed, holding the hand of the woman who had sacrificed in silence so her daughter wouldn't have to, and all she could think was, I thought success meant never needing anything from her again. But the only reason I ever stood this tall is because she spent her whole life kneeling for me. The truth was out now. It didn't just shatter everything, it rearranged the pieces into a completely different picture than the one Emily had been carrying in her head for years. Her mother wasn't a helpless old woman who'd made foolish choices. She was a soldier who had gone one more round than she had strength for, and finally collapsed without ever calling for backup. Now, at last, the call had been made, and Emily knew, whatever happened next, She could never go back to the life she had before knowing this. The revelation in the hospital room hung in the air long after Helen drifted back to sleep. Emily couldn't sit still. She couldn't think in straight lines. Everything inside her felt shaken out of place, like someone had tipped her life upside down and all the pieces were still falling. She stepped out into the hallway, needing space to breathe, needing walls that weren't closing in on her. Mark followed silently, the door clicking shut behind them. They stood there for a moment, both breathing heavily, both stunned in different ways. Mark leaned against the wall and dragged a hand over his face. "Jesus," he whispered. "Mom, she took all of that on alone." Emily wrapped her arms around herself. "For me," she murmured. "She did it for me." Mark looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in days. "You're not the only one she was protecting," he said gently. "She wouldn't let me help either." Emily didn't respond. She stared down the hall at nothing, feeling the weight of years pressing on her chest. How many times had her mother said, "I'm fine, honey. Don't worry about me"? How many times had Emily taken those words at face value because it was convenient, because believing them meant she could stay on the treadmill she'd built for herself? Mark said quietly, "we have to change things." She looked at him, eyes burning. "I know." "No," Mark insisted, pushing away from the wall. "I mean everything. The way we've been living. The distance. The checking in only when there's a problem. That's done. Over." Emily swallowed. "I'm changing. Starting today." And Mark raised an eyebrow. "Starting today, huh? You're going to walk into work and tell them you need time off?" "Yes," Emily said. He blinked. "Wait, you're serious?" "Dead serious." For the first time since they'd arrived, Mark actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because he was shocked. "You? Emily Parker? Miss I have 2 phones and 17 calendars? You're going to tell your board you need time off?" "I'm not asking," she said simply. "I'm taking it." Mark studied her face, realizing she meant it. Emily lifted her chin. "I'd burn that company to the ground before I let it take one more day from my mother." That was the moment something inside her shifted. Not a flicker, not a whisper, a tectonic shift, the kind that happens when a person realizes the ladder they've been climbing their whole life is leaning against the wrong wall. Emily walked back into Helen's room with a new spine, a new resolve, a new identity forming beneath the old one. Helen slept quietly, her breathing soft and even. Emily sat beside her, taking her mother's fragile hand in both of hers. "Mom," she whispered, even though Helen couldn't hear her. "I'm done choosing the wrong things." She meant it. And here's the thing. Real transformation? It never comes from a clean calendar or a motivational speech. It comes from heartbreak, from seeing something you love broken and knowing you broke it too. That's where Emily was now. She pulled out her phone, not to check messages, not to respond to demands, but to open her work email. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a few seconds. Then she typed, "Effective immediately. I'm stepping away from all active responsibilities. I will be unavailable for the foreseeable future due to a family medical emergency. My mother is my priority." She hit send before she could talk herself out of it. Then she put the phone face down on the tray and exhaled deeply, as if releasing a decade's worth of pressure in one breath. When she opened her eyes, Helen's nurse, Carla, was standing in the doorway. "You okay?" Carla asked gently. Emily nodded. "No, but I'm getting there." Carla stepped in and checked Helen's vitals. "Your mom's stronger today," she said with a small smile. "Still fragile, still shaken, but stronger." Emily looked at her mother, her heart swelling with fierce protectiveness. "I'm staying with her. Every night, every morning. I'll do whatever she needs." Carla touched her arm kindly. "That's good. She needs you now more than ever." Mark had stepped quietly inside and was listening. "Emily's not the only one staying," he added. "We'll take shifts. We're not leaving her alone again." Carla nodded approvingly. "Families like yours, when they show up like this, it makes all the difference." Emily's throat tightened. Show up. What a simple phrase. What a devastating truth. She hadn't shown up for a long, long time. Now she would. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, worn notebook, her old planner, the one she stopped using when her digital calendar took over her life. She flipped it open, tore out every page filled with old meetings, obligations, reminders that once felt urgent and now felt meaningless. Every page that defined who she used to be. One by one, she folded them tightly and slipped them into the trash can. Mark watched with raised eyebrows. Symbolic much? Emily smiled sadly. It's time to make room. For what? He asked. For a life that makes sense, she said. For a life I won't regret. He nodded slowly, understanding more than he let on. A few minutes later, Helen woke with a small groan. Emily was instantly at her side. "Hi, sweetheart," Helen whispered. Emily brushed a hand through her mother's graying hair. "Hi, Mom. I'm not leaving today." Helen's eyes softened. "You don't have to stay here all day, Emmy. I know you're busy. Your work—" "No," Emily said quietly, but firmly. "I told them I'm taking time off." Helen blinked, stunned. You did?" "I did," Emily repeated. "I'm here now, all the way here. I'm not rushing. I'm not dividing my attention. I'm not choosing anything over you again." Tears filled Helen's eyes. "You don't have to give up your whole life for me." "I'm not giving anything up," Emily said. "I'm choosing something better." Helen looked down at their joined hands, her thumb tracing Emily's knuckle like she used to when Emily was small. "I just wanted you to have a beautiful life," she whispered. "I want you to have one too," Emily replied. A long, quiet moment passed. Then Helen said something Emily never expected. "There's more I haven't told you." Emily froze. "What do you mean?" Helen took a shaky breath. "Claire wasn't the only one. After your father died, things were tight for a while. I made some mistakes. I trusted the wrong people more than once. I never told you or your brother because I wanted you to remember me as strong." Emily's heart sank. "Mom," Helen continued, her voice thin, "I thought if I could just keep you from worrying, then I'd be doing my job as your mother. But keeping everything inside," she swallowed, "it broke me, slowly, quietly, until I couldn't hold any of it anymore." Emily squeezed her hand. "You don't have to hold any of it alone anymore. I promise." When Helen drifted back to sleep, Emily stepped into the hallway again. Mark followed, and for a moment they both stood there in silence, two adults realizing they were still children in the presence of their mother's sacrifice. "We rebuild," Emily said quietly. "Everything she lost, everything she needs. We rebuild all of it." Mark nodded. "And we start with her home." "Yes," Emily said. "After visiting the police." He raised an eyebrow. "You're really ready for all that?" Emily looked back at the hospital room. The soft beeping, the fragile figure in the bed, the life built on sacrifice and fear and love that never asked for anything in return. "Yes," she said simply. "I'm ready." And she was. Ready to fight, ready to protect, ready to become the daughter her mother had always deserved. Her transformation wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't a sudden spark. It was a quiet, steady ignition inside her chest, a fire that would not go out again. By the time the sun began to rise fully, casting warm light through the cold hospital windows, Emily Parker was no longer the woman who had walked into that room 2 days earlier. She wasn't the untouchable businesswoman anymore. She wasn't the daughter who called once a week. She wasn't the woman who sacrificed her personal life for status. She was something else entirely. A daughter who finally understood the cost of her mother's love. A daughter who would never again let her mother stand alone in her shadows. A daughter reborn, not through success, but through reckoning. And she had no idea yet that this transformation would spark something even bigger, something that would change not just her mother's life, but the lives of countless others too. The first place Emily went after leaving the hospital wasn't home. It wasn't her office either. It was the bank. The downtown building was familiar, a place she associated with sharp suits, polished floors, and numbers that always made sense if you pushed them hard enough. Today, walking through the revolving glass doors, the marble lobby felt colder. This wasn't about margins anymore. It was about her mother. Mark walked beside her, unusually quiet. No jokes, no deflection, just a tight jaw and red-rimmed eyes. At the customer service desk, a young man in a crisp shirt greeted them. "Good morning. How can we help you?" Emily set the worn folder on the counter. "We need to speak to someone about possible elder financial exploitation," she said. "And we need to do that today." The words surprised even her, not because of how they sounded, but because she didn't soften them. Old Emily would have made it easy for the bank. This Emily was here for her mother. 10 minutes later, they were in a small office with a woman in her 50s whose badge read Karen Lewis, Risk Management. She spread the papers out across her desk, her expression growing tighter with every page she read. "You said your mother is Helen Parker?" she asked. "Yes," Emily replied. "She's 78. Alone. She's in the hospital now." Karen nodded. "We've sent her several letters," she said, "about unusual withdrawals, about an attempted loan application. About this," she tapped one form, "third-party financial management authorization. The signature here doesn't match her older records." Emily felt her chest burn. So someone was using her accounts. "It appears that way," Karen said. "We flagged the activity, but without confirmation from her or a police report, our options were limited. When older clients don't respond, we worry. Sometimes they're confused. Sometimes they've been told not to talk to us." Emily thought of Claire's sticky notes and quick explanations. "She was told not to," Emily said. "She was told everything was being handled." Karen's eyes softened. "I'm sorry," she said. "Here's what we can do now." She clicked a few keys. "We'll freeze all outgoing transfers. We'll file an internal fraud report. We'll prepare documents for the police. Depending on the investigation, some losses may be recoverable. I won't promise miracles, but we can at least stop the bleeding." "Stopping the bleeding is a miracle to her?" Emily said. Karen hesitated, then added, "Your mother isn't the first case we've seen like this. These helpers rarely have just one victim." That sentence lodged in Emily's mind like a splinter. From the bank they went straight to the police station. It was less dramatic than Emily's anger had imagined. No slamming fists, no screaming. Just a tired detective taking notes, scanning contracts, asking steady questions. "What we're seeing," he said, pointing at the pattern of withdrawals, "is textbook. Small transactions to test the water, then larger ones. Pressure, fear, rushed signatures. They like people with no nearby family, or families who are busy." Busy. The word hit hard. "We'll open a case," the detective said. "We'll connect with APS. It takes time, but this isn't going in a drawer." Emily nodded. "Good, because nothing about this belongs in a drawer anymore." Have you ever had that moment when your pain stops being just yours and starts to feel bigger, like it connects to something wrong in the world, not just in your house? That's what was happening to Emily now. Back at the hospital, Helen was awake when they walked in. She looked at their faces, then at the folder in Emily's hands, and her shoulders slumped. "You saw everything," she whispered. "I saw enough," Emily said gently, setting the folder aside. "We went to the bank, we went to the police. They believe you, Mom. They're investigating." Fear flickered in Helen's eyes. "I never wanted you in the middle of this." "I'd rather be in the middle of it," Emily replied, "than watching from the edges while you drown." Helen swallowed hard. "You shouldn't have to clean up my mistakes." Emily shook her head. "You spent your whole life cleaning up life for me before it even reached me. This isn't cleanup. This is payback, the good kind." A tiny smile tugged at Helen's mouth. Emily pulled the chair close and sat. "Mom, what happened to you is not just your story. It's a pattern. Seniors scared and alone, ashamed to ask for help, signing things they don't understand because some smiling stranger tells them to." Helen nodded faintly. "We're easy to rush," she said. "Everyone talks so fast now." "What if we slowed it down for you?" Emily asked. "For people like you, what if there was somewhere you could take your mail and say, 'Read this to me. Don't sell me anything. Just tell me what it means.'" Helen frowned slightly. "That would have saved me a lot of tears." "What if that place existed?" Emily pressed. "What if we built it?" Helen stared at her. You and your brother? Me? Emily said. With whoever I can convince to join me. Helen blinked. You have a whole company to run, she protested. Big clients, important people? Emily thought of boardrooms and glass walls and emails that never ended. Then she thought of her mother, shaking in a hospital bed, begging her children not to look in a drawer. I've spent years impressing important people, Emily said quietly. Right now, I just want to protect the most important one. Helen's lips trembled. You can't throw your life away for me. I'm not throwing it away, Emily said. I'm changing what it's for. Later that afternoon, when Mark had gone to pick up his daughter and the hospital floor had quieted, Emily opened her laptop at the little table under the window. Her phone, face down beside her, buzzed and buzzed with messages she no longer cared to read. A blank document stared back at her. At the top, she typed slowly, Silent Hands Initiative. She thought of all the things her mother's hands had done quietly. Packing lunches, wiping away tears, folding laundry at midnight, gripping a mop handle on hospital night shifts, and years later, shaking over a stack of papers she didn't understand. Hands that had held the world up for everyone else. Hands that no one had thought to protect. Silent hands, Emily murmured, for all the people who helped quietly and got hurt quietly. Words began to flow. A mission. Free, honest help for seniors with paperwork, bills, contracts, benefits, scams. A vision. Volunteers at community centers, church basements, clinic waiting rooms, partnerships with banks, hospitals, social workers. A hotline where someone patient would pick up the phone and say, "Okay, let's go through this together." One line at a time. The more she wrote, the more something inside her settled. She wasn't running from her old life. She was finally walking toward the one that made sense. The next week was a blur of meetings, very different from the ones she was used to. Instead of pitching growth strategies to executives, she was explaining elder fraud patterns to lawyers and asking for pro bono hours. Instead of chasing clients, she was calling community centers and saying, "If we show up, will you give us a table and 2 chairs?" Her board pushed back when she proposed redirecting part of the firm's profits to seed the initiative. "We're not a charity, Emily," one of them said. "Maybe we should have been a long time ago," she replied. "I built this company with the values my mother taught me. Somehow, I forgot to include her." In the end, she didn't ask for permission. She gave notice. "I'm stepping back from daily operations," she told them. "I'll stay on as an advisor, but my priority is this work now. You can come with me or not, but I'm going." They believed her. Enough of them agreed to back Silent Hands as a partner project that she didn't have to burn everything down to start over. But she would have, if it came to that. The first office wasn't downtown. It was in a modest brick building on the west side, near her mother's neighborhood. The rent was cheap. The carpet was old. The ceiling tiles were stained, but the front door opened easily. The chairs were sturdy, and the coffee was always fresh. On move-in day, Helen insisted on being there, cane in hand, bundled in a soft coat. "You should be in bed," Emily told her gently. "I've been in bed long enough," Helen replied. "I want to see where all my bad decisions went to work." On the wall just inside the entrance, Emily had painted a phrase in simple, bold letters. "You are not a burden. You are the reason we're here." Helen read it twice, lips moving silently. Her eyes glistened. "That's for me?" she asked. "It's for everyone like you," Emily said. "But yes, it started with you." They held a small opening day. No ribbon cutting, no press, just flyers at the clinic, a notice at the library, a post on the neighborhood Facebook group. They expected a handful of people. By noon, every chair in the small waiting area was full. They came with grocery bags full of letters, with envelopes tied together with rubber bands, with crumpled notices and red-stamped bills. Some came with nothing but questions they were too embarrassed to ask anyone else. A retired bus driver whose new friend had convinced him to sign up for an investment club. A widow who didn't understand why her rent kept going up when the number on the lease never changed. A grandmother raising her grandson who had 3 different student loan offers in his name and hadn't started college yet. Emily watched her volunteers Law students, retired attorneys, a former bank teller, Gertrude from next door, sit with them and say things like, "Let's slow down. You're not stupid. This is confusing. You don't owe them anything. You have options." At one table, Helen sat across from a small woman with silver hair and shaking hands. "I signed a paper I didn't read," the woman confessed. "Now they say I owe all this money. I feel so foolish." Helen reached across the table and took her hand. "I did the same thing," she said softly. "It nearly cost me everything. You're not foolish. You were scared and alone. That's different." "What did you do?" the woman asked. Helen smiled faintly. "My daughter stopped looking at her phone long enough to see me," she said. "Then she turned my worst day into this place." Later, on their way out, Emily asked her mother, "How does it feel?" Helen looked around at the little office with its mismatched chairs and warm chaos. "Like all the nights I cried in my kitchen weren't wasted," she said. "Like they were tuition for this." That evening, back at the hospital, because Helen still needed monitoring, still needed medication, still needed rest, Emily did something she never thought she'd do. She recorded a video. No makeup team, no lighting, just the overhead hospital fixture and the hum of machines in the background. "Hi," she said, staring straight into the camera. "My name is Emily. I was so busy building a life I could be proud of that I didn't notice my mother was quietly losing hers." She talked about Claire without naming her, about fear, about shame, about how many older parents say, "Don't worry about me," and how easy it is for adult children to believe them. "If you have someone in your life who's getting older and keeps telling you they're fine," she said, "go sit at their table anyway. Ask to see the letters. Ask how many pills are left in the bottle. Ask how many times they say, 'I don't want to be a burden,' and tell them that sentence is banned in your family." She ended with a sentence that had been living in her chest since the first night in the hospital. "Success means nothing if the people who raised you suffer in silence." Then she showed the video to her mother before posting it. "Too much?" Emily asked. Helen smiled through damp eyes. "It's not enough," she whispered, "but it's a start." The video traveled further than either of them expected. People shared their own stories in the comments. A nurse in Ohio, a grandson in Texas, a woman who wrote, "I paused this video and called my mom. She wasn't fine, thank you." And in the little brick office on the west side, the door kept opening. Not because Emily Parker was important, but because Helen Parker's story had finally been heard. Her pain had turned outward into protection. Her quiet suffering had become a loud, steady warning. Inside that office, a framed photo of Helen sat on a shelf, nothing glamorous. Just her at the small table, hands folded, eyes kind. Underneath it, on a simple plaque, were the words, "In honor of all the quiet sacrifices no one sees." That was the beginning of the legacy. Not a statue, not a building with her name on it. A place where no one like her would have to sign away their life alone again. The first real warm day of spring arrived the same week Helen was finally discharged from the hospital. Not the rushing kind of warm that comes too fast and disappears too soon, but that quiet, gentle kind. Sunlight slipping through clouds, a hint of green returning to the trees, the air tasting like possibility instead of survival. The kind of day that makes you breathe deeper without realizing why. Emily walked slowly beside her mother as they made their way from the hospital entrance to the car, Helen leaning on her cane with one hand and gripping her daughter's arm with the other. "Are you sure you're ready to go home, Mom?" Emily asked for the fourth time. Helen smirked. "Emmy, I've had 3 children. I've worked double shifts in this very hospital. I can handle a car ride." Emily grinned, relief threading through her exhaustion. Seeing her mother upright, talking, teasing, it was a victory she didn't take for granted. A month ago she'd sat beside this same woman's bed wondering if she had already lost too much of her. Now Helen stood blinking in the sunlight, her cheeks carrying a hint of color again. Mark pulled the car around, hopping out quickly. "All right, Mom, chauffeur service is officially here." Helen patted his cheek. "Such a good boy." He rolled his eyes but smiled. the tension that had lived in his shoulders for weeks finally beginning to loosen. They drove to Helen's apartment building on the west side. Emily had spent the past week cleaning it thoroughly, scrubbing the fear and shame out of every corner, replacing the loose bulbs, repairing the leaky faucet, fixing the broken drawer, the one that had held the secrets. The drawer now held nothing but a small lavender sachet and a note Emily had left inside. "You will never face anything alone again. Emmy." When they entered the apartment, Helen paused just inside the door. She looked around slowly. At the clean countertops, the new curtains, the neatly stacked mail tray, the sunlight touching the floor. "It looks peaceful," she whispered. Emily swallowed the knot in her throat. "It is." Mark carried her bag to the bedroom. Emily walked with her mother to the kitchen table, where a vase of fresh flowers waited. Yellow tulips, Helen's favorite. Helen touched one petal gently. "I haven't had flowers in the house in years. You'll have fresh ones every week now," Emily said softly. "That's a promise." Helen sat down carefully, her eyes roaming over the room again. "I thought I'd never feel safe here again," she admitted, "but it feels different now. Like the darkness left." Emily rested her hand over Helen's. "The darkness didn't leave, Mom. We pushed it out." They spent the afternoon talking, not just about the scam or the fear or the drawer, but about small things, favorite recipes, music Helen liked, childhood memories Emily thought she'd forgotten, the sound of her father's laugh, the day Helen learned Emily had gotten into college, the way the winter light used to fall across their old living room carpet. It felt like stitching a torn fabric, one careful thread at a time. Later that evening, Emily drove her mother to the new Silent Hands Initiative office for a brief tour before anyone arrived for the evening session. She wanted her mother to see it alive. The moment Helen stepped through the door, people looked up. Volunteers, clients, a few curious neighbors. Some of them recognized her from the opening day. Others recognized her only from the video her daughter had posted. A woman in her 70s stood and approached slowly, holding a stack of papers. "You're Helen, aren't you?" she asked. Helen blinked. "Yes." The woman smiled. "Your story saved me," she whispered. "My niece brought me here because she saw your daughter's video. I was signing things I didn't understand, too." Helen reached out and took the woman's hand, the gesture so natural, so familiar. "Then you're not alone anymore," she said. Emily watched them with an ache spreading through her chest. The good kind, the kind that makes room instead of taking it away. The room around them buzzed with gentle conversation, laughter, shuffling papers, pens scratching, coffee brewing in a corner. Every person in that little space was there for a reason. Every person had walked in carrying a fear, a question, a burden, and none of them left with it alone. In the corner hung a framed picture, Helen on opening day, smiling shyly in her coat, a soft light touching her face. Beneath it, the plaque, "For the hands that held us long before we learned to stand." Helen stared at the picture for a long time. "That's too much," she whispered. "It's not enough," Emily said. Helen touched her daughter's cheek, her eyes full. "You made something beautiful out of something broken." "We did," Emily corrected softly. When they stepped back outside into the cool evening air, the sun was dipping low, painting the city in shades of gold and pink. Helen looked out at the neighborhood. Cars passing, children laughing in the distance, dogs barking, neighbors chatting on stoops. "Life keeps moving," she said quietly. "Even when you feel like you've stopped." Emily slipped an arm through hers. "Then we move with it." They walked slowly to the car, neither rushing, neither worried about the time. Life had stretched enough. They weren't willing to let it snap anymore. On the drive home, Helen gazed out the window at the city lights. "Emmy?" she asked. "Yes? Do you ever regret choosing work over family all those years?" Emily gripped the wheel, then answered honestly. "I don't regret wanting a better life," she said, "but I regret thinking I had to chase it alone." Helen nodded, thinking. "And you?" Emily asked. "Do you regret not asking for help?" Helen smiled sadly. "Every day," she said, "but I regret it less now, because you came when it mattered." Emily exhaled, something warm settling deep in her chest. When they got back to the apartment, Emily helped her mother get comfortable on the couch, blankets tucked around her legs. Helen sighed softly. "It feels good here," she said. "Safe." Emily sat beside her. "It is safe. I want to stay a while," Helen murmured. Emily grinned. "I was hoping you would. I brought pajamas." Helen laughed. "A small sound, but real. Just don't hog the blankets like you did when you were little." "I make no promises." They watched an old movie together, one Helen used to play on rainy afternoons when Emily was a child. Somewhere between the first and second act, Helen fell asleep, her hand resting gently over her daughter's. Emily looked at her mother's peaceful face, illuminated by the soft glow of the TV, and felt a quiet truth settle into her bones. This moment right here, was worth more than every award, every contract, every deal she'd ever signed. Because success without presence wasn't success at all. Because triumph meant nothing if love didn't grow beside it. Because saving the world started with saving the person who raised you. As the credits rolled, Emily whispered, "Thank you for teaching me what matters." Outside, the city continued humming. Cars, voices, distant music, life flowing forward. But inside the little West Side apartment, time seemed to pause just long enough for something sacred to take root. A new beginning. A healed bond. A legacy born not from wealth or ambition, but from quiet sacrifice and unexpected redemption. Emily leaned back, pulling a blanket over both of them. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about tomorrow. She wasn't thinking about work. She wasn't thinking about what she'd lost, only what she'd found. And as the night deepened, the final truth of this journey whispered through her mind like a closing prayer. Success means nothing if the people who raised you suffer in silence. Tonight, no one was suffering alone. Tonight, a family was whole. Tonight, a daughter had finally come home.